You all have your sympathetic nervous systems all activated, and now it's hard for you to settle down. Waking up, by the way, is a stressful thing for a lot of people, like making the transition from parasympathetic dominance to now getting everything up and going and all that. A lot of people who are reactive had a lot of trouble knowing. So, at its extreme, fight or flight. These are the responses when you start to feel trapped by something. You have all of those physiological reactions which throughout our history, whether you think of it as being created this way or evolved this way, have been put in place to allow us to deal with dangerous circumstances. On the other end is the parasympathetic nervous system, the inhibiting step on the brake, calm down, chill out, recover part of the nervous system. It is much slower to activate, and it has a damping effect on all of that sympathetic. So roughly speaking, sympathetic and parasympathetic are antagonistic, I guess. Generally speaking, when one's on, the other one is off. Or there's some circumstances like sexual activity where both are active, but that's another talk. So the parasympathetic conserves and restores energy. So all of those reserves that have been drawn out of the energy bank and put into action so that we can deal with whatever this threat is, now need to be replenished and rest and digest. So this is what's going on in the sympathetic phase. This zebra does not care about mating at this moment, or about eating, or about much of anything else other than trying to get through to the next moment. And then when things calm down, this happens. Done being chased by a lion, I'm going to go back to grazing, I'm going to go back to drinking, I'm going to go back to replenishing, restoring all of those resources that I've burned up in the process of dealing with this existential threat. The human autonomic system functions much the same, right? We are wonderfully well adapted to respond to acute stress. So we also do fight. We also do flight. The problem arises for us in that we are very poorly adapted to deal with chronic stress. We respond to chronic stress as if it were acute. So all of those systems get activated. All of those things that we need to respond to, whatever it is that's threatening, get generated in the same way as they do for the zebra when it's being chased by a lion. So the same physiological reaction occurs regardless of whether the threat is real or exaggerated or imagined. These are things that we do that zebras don't. So we can respond to the idea of a letter from the Internal Revenue Service in much the same way as a zebra is responding. For some of you, you respond in the same way to the thought of doing your defense. The licensing exam. Yeah, see, now people are like completely distracted from the talk because they're thinking about it. So you can walk away from the Internal Revenue Service office. You can avoid that, you can escape from that, but you can't escape from the idea of the Internal Revenue Service. That is the part of being a human being that is our greatest asset and at times our greatest liability. You can't not think about something. You can't not have an emotion. You can't not have a behavioral impulse. And so we are feeling, when we get that letter from the Internal Revenue Service, every bit as much agitated, involved, ramped up, sympathetic dominant as the zebra is. And for many of the people I work with, they feel like that a lot, maybe all the time. And so if you have that feeling, and you wear yourself out, eventually you have to replenish. Now, ideally, sympathetic and parasympathetic with balance, right? Like a lot of other systems in our body. You breathe in, you breathe out, you wake, you sleep, your heart beats, it rests. We have all kinds of things that operate on that basis. But for the people that we work with, that I work with, that is often not true. And so here's the way I talk to them. This is not mine, I stole it from somebody else, but they probably stole it from somebody else, so I'll claim it as mine. If you think of your nervous system, agitated person, as being like a car, I always do that. Your gas pedal is to the floor all the time. You're constantly wound. All the gauges are topping out. Everything is revved. You are ready to go at any moment to respond to something else. You're all revved up, but it's like you're in an empty parking lot somewhere in neutral. There's no good reason for that. That's just how you are. You feel as if something awful is going to happen at any moment. And by this time, people are doing this. Right? You're not comfortable in your own skin. They're doing this, whatever that combination of words is. And if you feel that way, for a long period of time, one of two things is going to happen. The engine is going to explode. And so that might look like panic. It might look like, you know, a breakdown kind of mode. It might look like extreme aggression, depending on your kind of personal attributes. Something is going to happen. You're going to go over the top and not be able to manage that effectively, or you're going to run out of gas. Because it takes an enormous amount of energy to be on high alert all the time. And one of the things that I notice often in the first time I'm working with somebody on peripheral kinds of things is like 5 minutes in, their shoulders will start to drop down, and then they'll yawn. Because they finally settled down for just a second, and their physiology is catching up with them a little bit. Happens all the time. So sympathetic dominance could be genetic or familial. It's a rare circumstance where you encounter somebody who's extraordinarily anxious, for example, who doesn't have someone else in the family who's that way. It could be a reaction to trauma or persistent higher levels of stress. Some people start off pretty balanced and pretty even, but they're exposed to something that kind of rubs their nervous system raw, makes them more reactive. The etiology is not necessarily critical to the initial intervention, which in my mind still focuses on calming the system down physiologically, but it could be relevant to treatment later if we need to do some like post-traumatic stress kinds of things, or from the neurofeedback perspective, alpha, theta, deep state treatment. So from those people who are wound up, who are sympathetic nervous system dominant, the persistent message that their peripheral nervous system, the collecting information part, is sending to their brain, and here's the way I usually say it to them in the quiet and calm of my office. The persistent message that your nervous system is sending to your brain is something like, ah! And then they jump back, and then they say, that's right. That's what I feel all the time. I feel like something awful is about to happen at any time. For those people, it's not an error if they are feeling and reacting as if something is wrong or about to be. That's the message that's coming into their brain all the time. That's not a brain problem, right? If your body is telling you there's something wrong here, something bad is about to happen, it's going to happen any second, then what's your brain supposed to think? There's something wrong here. Something bad is going to happen any second. So the brain's doing its job. It's very hard to be calm when there's an existential threat. I don't feel safe. I must be in danger. Right? That's the way we're built. We're now reacting to an internal process as if it were an external event. That's really important. So if you feel that way, and you look up and there's a tiger in the room, great! I understand why I feel this way. It makes perfect sense. I'm going to die, but at least I'll die knowing why I feel so wound up. This is good. But of course, for the people that I work with, there's no tiger. but they have all of the feelings, all of the sense of threat, and they have the exact same need that any one of us has to, when we feel that sense of danger or existential threat, we need to know why. Because that's the thing we have to stay away from, whatever it is. That's the thing that's going to kill us. That's the thing that's going to end our existence. That's the thing that's going to finally do us in. I need to know what it is, but there isn't anything. So what do? We start looking for imaginary tigers. There must be something here somewhere. I don't feel safe. I must be in danger. What is it? Maybe it's germs. Maybe it's the way that person looked at me. Maybe it's that my stuff is in inadequate order. Maybe it's the IRS is watching me. I don't know. Maybe it's that I've committed some great sin. I've heard this a lot, right? You'll forgive me, Aaron, but Catholics are overrepresented in my sample of people with OCD. It's a very natural landing place for their discomfort. I can't identify any tigers in my environment. There's only one explanation. I've committed some great sin. And then I've had any number of people who say, well, I can't do communion anymore, I can't partake in any of the sacraments or whatever because I'm beyond redemption, clearly, because I feel this way all the time. The point is, or the other alternative, my ducks are out of a row somehow. The point of all of that is that that reaction is natural, automated, and adaptive. It's just excessive. Is what's supposed to happen. You are not crazy. You're just overreactive. And how you got to the place you got is perfectly understandable. And it's okay. And we can figure out what to do about it. Brains can't learn to not do that. It's not strictly true because sometimes we can turn down the volume on that enough, but for our purposes. Therefore, there are two potential sources of distorted perception of threat and danger. Normal reaction by the brain to an inaccurate output from the body, or an excessive reaction by the brain to normal input from the body. We can go at either one of those depending on our assessment of the situation. We can do peripheral neurofeedback, we can do biofeedback. So our reaction to that at the surface level is attempts to manipulate or control whatever it is we think is the tiger, right? So from the time you were all toddlers, if there was a problem for you, what do? You fix it. You manipulate something, you control something, you get a hold of it. If you can't do that, you escape from it, you avoid it. And so when you begin to experience these problems with germs or with the IRS or with sin, what do? You try to manipulate or control it somehow, and if you can't do that, you try to avoid it. The problem with that, of course, is you can't avoid your thoughts. You can't avoid your emotions. You can't avoid your behavioral impulses. But because that's the experience we've had in a gazillion reinforced trials from the time we were toddlers, manipulating something in our environment to control some difficulty, we keep doing it. So where these things land, this is why it's important to get a good history, where these things land is a function of the person's environment, history, behavioral experience. You can have a phobia about anything. You can get stuck on any behavior and behave compulsively in any direction. It doesn't matter, that just happened to be the tiger that you landed on. But it's important for us to know that history so we know how to intervene with the person at a personal level. Am I making sense here? Is this okay? So what do? What we've always done. Manipulate the environment somehow. And of course, it doesn't work because that's not where the problem is. But it is temporarily satisfying, or gratifying maybe is a better word, but never fully satisfying because that's not what the problem is, but in the absence of something that is more productive, that gives me a more generalized beneficial response, I'm gonna keep doing that thing because at least it makes me feel better for a minute. The problem is it's never fully satisfying, and like Agent Smith here, you just feel like you've been dodging a bullet. It's not like it's fixed, I just dodged a bullet. But the bullets never stop coming because that's not where the problem is. So attempts to manipulate control, attempts to escape or avoid, including things like substance use, which we were talking about a little bit at the break. And then we talk about why that can ever work, which is a little bit of the discussion that I just suggested here. Because you can't avoid your thoughts. So at the deeper level, we're talking about the involvement of memory and language. And this is where I'm likely to introduce kind of relational frames work. Do people know about relational frames? It's a good thing to know. It's really the best, far and away, behaviorally understandable approach to the acquisition of language that I've ever found. It makes perfect sense from a purely behavioral standpoint. Relational frames theory for those patients or their parents who are capable of kind of getting a hold of this at a more conceptual level. You have a gazillion reinforced escape trials. This feels good to me for a minute, you know? I'm feeling kind of agitated, not comfortable in my own skin, but if I just get things organized, it'll be fine. Except it's not. But if I do this, it'll be fine. Those of you who have been around for a little while have heard people say that a gazillion times. If I could just this, fill in the blank, everything would be okay. No, it won't. Then there'll be another this. And then another this after that. You just dodged a bullet. And those very often are the people who get very little satisfaction from really high achievement. Right? A lot of times, particularly with kids, these are people who are bright. I get a lot of really, really bright, brilliant kind of kids who are suffering because they can think of a billion ways things could go wrong and don't have the maturity or the context to put those things in. And every time they earn an A, they feel good for 10 seconds. And then it just feels like they dodged a bullet. They don't get real satisfaction from it, just like that's what I have to do. And so if I do it, just one more bullet. It's the psychophysiological Ponzi scheme, right? I don't know if you know about Ponzi schemes. It's a financial thing where you take money from the next group to pay off the previous group. But the idea is that, you know, what happens, and whatever way you can convey this to people, is that their pain, their discomfort, exists in two distinct time frames. Current pain, which is what I'm feeling when I'm trying to confront the tiger in the room. And so in order to not deal with that tiger in the room, I engage in some superstitious behavior, or I avoid that situation, and I am relieved for the moment of that pain. And so it feels productive, it feels useful, but you don't really get rid of that pain, you just shift it to another column in the pain ledger. Future pain. The places you don't go, the things you don't do, the things you don't become, because you've been so busy avoiding the current pain, not engaging with the things that felt challenging or difficult for you. And that's a setup for ACT, relational frames theory, mindfulness kinds of things, whatever that combination of things is, it makes sense to your patient. Okay, comments about any of that sort of background stuff? Okay, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of modalities of peripheral biofeedback, including heart rate variability training, a little bit on respiration, and then we'll go from there. So you've all seen this somewhere. This is the kind of standard, metric for heart rhythm. And it has, all these points are labeled. The ones of interest to us are Q, R, S. So when we're talking about heart rate variability, we're talking about how much R to R variability is there. We get the maximum amount of variability if every beat is the same, right? If there are interruptions in this, and we get some other thing in here, then that's less variability than between these 2 points. It's kind of confusing, it seems backwards to me. So what we're really talking about is from here to here. And it turns out that heart rate variability is a really great shorthand for how balanced people are in terms of autonomic function. Your heart is a big communicator with your brain. Lots and lots of exchange back and forth between your heart and your brain. The majority of it in the direction of your heart to your brain, rather than the other way around. So it's not accidental that people for a long time have identified the heart as kind of the seat of emotional response. It really is in a lot of ways. But I tend to think of it at a more purely physiological level rather than getting the emotional part of it so much. So it's a major indicator of organism status. The heart connects with and sends signals to the amygdala, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, a lot of organizing central structures. The heart brain, which people are going to talk about, this nerve plexus kind of thing, can learn, remember, and act independently of the cranial. Your heart really does have kind of a brain of its own. And it turns out that hearts can recognize and respond to stimuli before the brain is aware of them. So people really do, some people have this kind of premonition kind of thing or pre-stimulus that they respond to. Now there's also some data to suggest that like people's heart rhythms and EEG will fall in line with other people's, all kinds of just really odd sort of stuff going on here. The system that we use is one that's used widely, and this is a nonprofit kind of a group who does some really good work. It's called HeartMath or M-Wave. The sensor, in this case, remember the components of biofeedback systems, is a plethysmograph, which I just like saying that, plethysmograph. It's a plethysmograph. Okay? And we put it on the ear, and it's a high intensity light that measures blood volume, and that's how it detects what's going on with pulse, and peripheral blood flow is also a good indication of how calm you are. If you're in trouble, you're going to run away, blood flows away from your extremities into your big muscles so you can fight or run or whatever. It's also why people tend to get headaches, vascular headaches when they're stressed. There's a real-time display of heart rate variability. If you have more sympathetic activity, there's less heart rate variability. If you have more parasympathetic activity, you get more heart rate variability. So we want to be, at least the people I'm working with, I want more parasympathetic management. And the display includes something that HeartMath people call coherence, which they regard as just kind of collaboration among the various elements of your physiology. So the way that this happens is that there's just a trace. They have a plethysmograph on their ear, and then we start tracking in real time, and very often it'll start off looking like this. So a lot of up and down, a lot of reactivity back and forth between sympathetic and parasympathetic, and then it will tend to settle into something like this with a little bit of instruction that begins with focusing on how people are breathing. Because while you cannot change, most people, in a volitional way, how your heart is operating, you can change how you're breathing. And so all of those things we've been telling people forever about taking deep breaths and slowing down and all of that are actually useful with a little bit more instruction around them on how to do that and a little bit more feedback about the results that it produces. The overwhelming majority of people I work with, within 5 to 10 minutes, sitting in the chair, in that office, looking at the screen, calm down. For many of them, it's the first time, or certainly the first time in a long time. People have been telling them how to calm down, and they might as well have told them to just speak Chinese because they didn't even know what calm means. much less how to do it. So at the very least, I can give them a point of reference. This is what calm means. This is how it works. Not only that, but you know what? You got yourself there. I gave you a little bit of instruction, but 10 minutes, you got yourself calmed down. That's pretty good. If you can do it here, maybe you can do it other places. Maybe you can do it right before the test, or right before you take a free throw. Or right before you get up to give a talk to a group of interns. Oops, going on with this, right? So the goal for us is to improve autonomic balance or tone, to get parasympathetic and sympathetic to be more cooperative and collaborative. And that invariably results in a subjective impression of, I feel better, I feel calm. I don't feel the need to look for tigers because I'm not feeling so wound up. I don't feel so uncomfortable in my own skin. So the initial self-regulation skill focuses on paced diaphragmatic breathing. You know, if you don't know what that is, it's not too hard to find out. So this is actually animated here, right? So what I'm telling people in the early instruction is just, you know, we're going to focus on breathing in a balanced, even way. And what I want you to do is follow this little guideline. And I want you to begin by exhaling, always. Because exhaling activates your parasympathetic nervous system and the related organs. Exhaling is also the opposite of what you do if you're scared. If a tiger walks into the room now, everybody's going to do this. We want to do the opposite of that. We don't
Hello, I'm your coherence coach. I'm here to teach you.
I turned this guy off because he's kind of creepy. So we're breathing out as the ball goes down. We're trying to extend the breath out over the entire time so that by the time we get to the bottom, you're basically out of air. You need to start breathing in. You should be about halfway empty by the time the ball gets to the bottom, or to the halfway point, and so on. So it's smooth, it's even. I have people put their hand on their abdomen and push so they can kind of locate where the source of that should be. It's not like when you go to your doctor and he or she puts a stethoscope on and says, take a deep breath, you do this. It's the opposite. Everything is quiet and calm up here. It's low, it's slow, it's deep. And we are in the business of activating parasympathetic function during that time. Okay? That's just a little guide that goes in there. I would encourage, it's very low expense involved in heart rate variability training and that equipment. It's really, really inexpensive. There's good support from the people there. It's a nonprofit. They provide all kinds of supporting information. I very often recommend that my patients acquire some, version of this. The thing that you're looking at here is another device that we use sometime for respiration. It's called Respirate. It is the only, as far as I'm aware, FDA-approved device, non-pharmacological, for improving blood pressure. This does some of the same things that HeartMath does, in that it controls respiration, except you take this little band here, and it goes, right below your rib cage. And it samples, 4 or 6 breaths, and then creates a little program for you to gradually bring your breathing down to a therapeutic range. So it's giving you some tones to work with. It gives you a little guidance. Breathe in, breathe out. It's like the same guy who does all of these things in a sense. Really very calm. Breathe in, breathe out. A lot of people find this really useful. It gets them there more quickly, and since it's a gradual change, it's not as demanding on them to go, as the kind of heart rate variability is. My colleague, Dr. Williams, has adopted what I think is a pretty innovative approach. He'll do